Cricket has never finished at the close of play. It lives in the arguments, the memories, the comment sections. Cricket makes you talk. Combox is entering that chat. Welcome to Combox. This is the Wagon Wheel podcast hosted by Jarrod Kimber, where we answer your questions on cricket if you were the person who asked the questions on cricket. You can support us via Super Chats if you're watching live on the YouTube. But generally, well, not generally, but a lot of the questions come beforehand via the Good Areas Podcast Network on Patreon, where people ask things like Abe, who was asked with your chat with G Park last week, got me thinking. Already individual players, do knockout performances and ICC trophies tell us anything about a player's quality beyond what is already captured by their overall record? If so, what exactly do they add? Or is it a mistake to rate AB lower because he never won an ICC trophy? It's funny, we did that episode, and I think there are a lot of people very upset that we started in 1975 and 1975? Yeah, 1975 and not 2008. It's like, okay, just adjust the numbers for the players that started before that era, and you could take them out. But apparently, people couldn't do that with their minds. And the other thing that I got a lot was a lot of people contacted me saying, well, Deepak seems to really be interested in how players have gone in, finals and semifinals, quarterfinals and everything. And I've done this quite a few times now for a few different players. Chris Gale was one that got a lot of bad press for how he handled finals. But I think it was actual finals. I think he was pretty good in like semifinals and quarterfinals. I'm pretty sure Chris Gale played one of the best T20 innings in the first part of T20 cricket anyway, against Sri Lanka in like a World Cup semi-final, right? That's off the top of my head anyway. I'm pretty sure I was at that game, so I remember it. And I went through his record, knockout games and finals across. It didn't seem like it really stood up. Another one was, I won't out the person, but a major cricket coach I was talking about a player who I thought was really good. And this person was like, yeah, but he always bottles it when the pressure's on and everything. And I said, what do you mean? He said, if you look at his record in finals. So again, I went back and looked at this guy's record in finals. He was really good. He was above average in all the finals that he played. Starred in a couple. He had a couple of bad ones, as you would expect. But was a very good player in finals, semifinals, those sorts of things. So firstly, that's the first thing I would start with, is that people's memories don't always work the way that you need them to. And I don't know how many people are actually going through every single final that this person has played, rather than just the ones they can remember, right? So that's the first thing I would look at with this. The second thing I would look at is that some of these players might have played, 200, 400, 500 games, across their careers. And they might have only played like 10 or 15 high leverage finals. There are players who have been very, very good in a few high leverage finals who don't have great careers. And we generally don't always think of them as great players, right? Ben Stokes might be the biggest outlier when it comes to that kind of thing. But in general, I would say, looking at it overall is... I think in general, when something like that happens, I think it's just that you have a situation where people are remembering again the games that they want, or estimating someone's ability based on a couple of big games. Eventually, and I've said this a lot, if you go back, I've done lots of pieces on this, going back quite a fair way, Abe. If you go back and you have a look, the best players are usually the best players in all the biggest games. And if they're not, there might be a reason why that changes, right? So if you look at someone like James Harden in the NBA, I think everyone will say he's soft in the playoffs and he can't handle the playoffs. I think the reason James Harden isn't very good in the playoffs is all year he grifts fouls, and in the playoffs they stop picking fouls. He's no softer, but he doesn't know what to do, because all year he's been manufacturing situations where he gets 3 free throws over and over again for almost nothing. And the refs have just been allowing it all season. And they get to the playoffs and he just gets thumped by someone, and the refs don't call the fouls anymore. And so I think there are probably cricket versions of that as well. There are probably also things like Ben Stokes and Kevin O'Brien, are two guys that have stood up in two or three, like major, three or four, how many each, major times for their side. But remember that when you're a middle order player, standing up for your side is kind of one of the things that you do when your team is in a little bit of trouble, right? Like that's actually part of the job description. Whereas a top order player might be just as good in a final and you've forgotten about it because they just won the game easily. And then it's like, wow, but they were always in front. There was no real pressure in that game. So it's a very different situation when you're looking at those sorts of things, right? And so the other thing I would add is, and to come back to basketball has the biggest ring culture thing, right? If you look at someone like Charles Barkley, who was obviously a great basketballer, is the reason that he doesn't win a championship over other players who are not quite at his level, like say Jason Tatum, right? Jason Tatum's not quite at the level of Charles Barkley, right? But Jason Tatum had an incredible team and coaching system all around him, right? It was a very, very different situation to be in. And Charles Barkley was probably, until he got to Phoenix, never really had the team around him. Even then, it was a good team, but maybe not quite what he needed, right? So why are we penalizing him for that? And in cricket, it's even more so. AB de Villiers doesn't bowl, right? He's only on one side of the ball. He was down the order quite a bit. I just think that's the wrong way to look at things. Partly because of the amount of games, partly because of the impact and everything else. But but it's also, it should be subjective, right? That's actually, everyone should have a different method for working out who they think the best players of all time are. I think that's absolutely fine. Gaji says, which cricket grounds are the best to visit or must visit? Like Madison Square, Wrigley Stadium, Fenway Park, etc. I think Eden Gardens, MCG, Oval, Newlands. I'm missing another one. The Wanderers. I'm trying to think if there's any in the West Indies. New Zealand. I suppose Gaul. Maybe might be another one. I mean, I think and obviously a lot of people would throw Lords in there as well. It kind of depends what you want. I mean, the MCG is kind of one of the more iconic ones. I think MCG and Eden Gardens for me are kind of two of the most iconic over a long period of time. Lords is fine, but I don't find it as awe-inspiring to walk into as I do with those two grounds. When you've got places like Newlands and Gaul, there's other reasons to go there. I would say that one of the best, if you're looking for crowd environment, I think the Wanderers is about as good as anywhere I've ever been. But I've been to a few like IPL games as well, like, in Chinnaswamy, Wankhede, maybe some others that I've forgotten as well. Eden Gardens is another one. The crowd can quite often swell up there, but there's something about Wanderers that brings the crowd around. And Wankhede can be a little bit like that. It just doesn't have it just feels more corporate than Wanderers, if you know what I mean. It feels like someone saw the Wanderers and went, "That's a great ground. We're going to recreate that," and it just misses some of the soul, right, of it naturally having happened. Sam says, "Why was Flintoff so bad at bowling to tail enders? On paper, it seems like he would be good at tall, fast reverse swing. Was it just a lengthy bowl?" I think it was probably just a lengthy bowl, Sam. I've never had a look at it, but I would assume, and maybe this is one for Varun. I don't know if he's around today, but I would assume that there is a correlation between bowlers who are good at caught behind as their main method. I don't even know if we would have stats on this. Being bad against the tail. I'm just writing this down in case we can look it up. Against tail. And the reason I would say that is that what you're trying to do then is trying to make sure that you're just getting the outside edge of the bat, right? Whereas probably bowlers who are, I think Shoaib Akhtar is one of the best bowlers against the tail ever. He was someone who wasn't really about caught behinds, right? And I think if you look at Mitchell Starc, he was another one who's, he's become better at caught behinds of recently. But if you look historically at Mitchell Starc, he was someone who was a little bit better against the tail than he was frontline bowlers. frontline batters, and he was someone who would attack the stumps quite a bit. I'm trying to think of there was someone else I was thinking of in there. What's fascinating about about Flintoff is that Harmison was really good against the tail, and Harmison's length is quite short as well. So I think it's less to do with bowling short, and I think it's more to do with how you try and dismiss batters. And I don't think, especially 9, 10, and 11, it's particularly easy to nick them off regularly. It's, you probably need a higher percentage of bowled and or maybe caught in the outfield or LBW. Ali says, how can international cricket look in the future with its second and third biggest market being sidelined by its biggest market in terms of population? If imagine international cricket ceases to exist, can cricket grow bigger in just siloed domestic league structure? Look, to be honest, what has happened here, Ali, is not with the India, Pakistan, Bangladesh thing. That is not something that is. It's something that I think was all one way or another was going to come, whether it came like this in a more dramatic way. But international cricket is already being sold and siloed off, right? It's already being made smaller and less important and everything else. So yes, at a certain point, this may make it worse, but international cricket was in danger anyway. International cricket had a real chance between 2008 and 2011 to restructure itself, professionalize itself, and make sure that it had a really good future. But a little bit like climate change, they didn't quite get around to it, right? They decided to argue amongst themselves. Then from 2012 to 2014, 15, they then just said, India, England, and Australia, you could fix this. That didn't work either, and they didn't fix it. They didn't really even seem to care all that much. Off the back of that, you have the 100 as a sort of, as England realizing that the world has already changed at that point. We've been heading towards this sort of thing since 1911, when we came up with a stupid rule to bring about how many cricket teams are allowed to play cricket. I mean, the fact that now, Ali, we are still sitting in a situation where if you want to play Test cricket, you have to be invited into a private members club makes absolutely no sense. So international cricket, as it is currently formulated, still makes no sense. Outside of the bit of a structure around World Cups and Champions Trophies and things, and even I have to argue that Champions Trophy is barely structured. But outside of that, there's no real structure on international cricket. So when something goes wrong, who's going to fix it? Right? And that's been the issue. I mean, throughout the entire history of the game, but certainly since the early 2000s. Hurt says, watching Jayasuriya Surya looking nervous on the sidelines during the recent Sri Lanka versus England T20 reminds me of Taj Malik in the early days of Afghan cricket. Tell us any funny story incident you've heard or seen involving coaches or staff members while their team playing an important game. Yeah, it's one of those interesting things of what do you want your coach to look like on the boundary, right? I remember one coach saying to me that if he saw the other coach stressing or panicking, he was like, they're probably not as professional as they need to be, because this is something that he would have seen 100 times before, 1,000 times before happening on the cricket field at the moment. And his team just needs to react to it. So why is he being frantic? I mean, I suppose the best story hurts is the Justin Langer one with the bin. I mean, to be fair, that documentary showed us quite a few. There's been a couple of like Australian coaches who just have gone on absolute tirades of players and the players are just sitting there shrugging their shoulders going, this doesn't really make any sense. And we don't know how to react to that. Maybe I think there was a Darren Lehman one was maybe perhaps the most famous one where I think Sam Perry wrote this piece years ago about how Darren Lehman just kept telling them to watch the ball. I don't know what, I can't even remember what the swear word was, watchable fucker or whatever it was. I should know, I've written about it before, but and the guys are like, yeah, that's great advice, but don't we also need to help ourselves technically? And I think that that sort of fire and brimstone coach is kind of dying a little bit anyway, right? I know, Langer and Gambier, we still have a couple of them around, but essentially yelling at people to make them better doesn't really work. And so if you look at, one of the famous ones is Bumble when he's coaching England on the boundary for England, Zimbabwe. And I've never really talked to him that much about it other than, bringing it up. But that's a really good one. If you go back, Hertz, and you watch the draw in Harare, I think it was, you would just see Pumble and you're just like, just like that. I'm not sure that sort of coaching really helps. But there are coaches who keep their heart on their sleeve in all sports. And there are other coaches who don't. I think it's probably better if you can keep a more of a level side of it. Same with a player. But sometimes people need that sort of motivation, energy. Mob says Trent Bolt's home association, Northern Districts, have won the mighty Super Smash. Super Smash. Still missing the Georgie Pie part of the Super Smash. Let's assume ND have now qualified for the next iteration of the Champions Trophy. Mumbai, New York won the MLC 2025 and progressed to the same tournament. In this scenario, can you please explain how the decision will be made as to whether the lovely Trent plays for Mumbai, New York, or Northern Districts? And what weight of the following factors: money, what Trent wants, contract with New Zealand cricket, etc., play a part. Money is the only thing that would play a part. When the Champions Trophy was, sorry, not Champions Trophy, Champions League. Sorry if I said Champions Trophy before as well. You wrote the Champions Trophy. No wonder I'm confused, Bob. When the Champions League was first played in cricket, I think Kyron Pollard, Dirk Nannis, and Cameron White all qualified for 3 sides each. And my understanding of what happened is that the richer side offered money to the poorer side in order to use their players. And in every single situation that I'm aware of, those players took the extra money. Because Champions League's not even a big tournament for these guys, right? Like as in, it's not like, oh, I want to win it for Victoria or for, Trinidad or whatever. It's like, actually, I want to win it and I want to make as much money off this extra IPL tournament kind of thing as I can. So yeah, that's what will happen. That money will come down into cricket, but it's not enough to like change Northern Districts' future or anything. But maybe it's enough for what? 2 extra coaches in some cases, 3 extra coaches. So there could still be benefit to the people who have it. Where it gets more murky and more tricky is if you've got 2 different IPL owners who both have qualified for the Champions League and the player is available. So it might not be that they're 2 IPL teams. One might be an IPL team and one might be Major League Cricket or SA20 or 100 team, right? Then it gets a little bit more confusing. But I would assume that if this ever happens, that there will be a system in place. And I think it was Dean Kino who was in charge of Champions League, and I believe he had that. He realized that was going to be an issue from the start, so they have some sort of precedent there. Adityan says, which cricketer do you like making fun of the most, and why is it Prosper Utsaya or Q Gilbertine's bowling? Prosper Utsaya is a ridiculous cricketer. I don't know if I just like anomalies, right? I like positive outliers and negative outliers and weird outliers. And so someone like Prosper Utsaya, I think for me and Burren, we just couldn't believe it every time we looked at a graphic. He was on it in this really weird position, right? Gilberdine, I just don't fundamentally understand how he's bowling in international cricket, making it work. So well done to him for that. And that's enjoyable. I mean, Gilbertine's enjoyable as a cricketer. I've met Gilberdine. He's an enjoyable human being. One of the most polite cricketers I've ever come across. I think I've told this story before, but after a press conference in the 2019 World Cup, and that was a World Cup where I exposed one of their players getting sent home. I wrote really critically of Afghanistan. He came up and shook my hand and thanked me for, for following them around the tournament. I can promise you that hasn't happened many times in my career. But yeah, no, it's not about, I just enjoy weird cricketers, like weird good cricketers, weird cricketers. But Prosper is one of the strangest cricketers in the history of our sport. And we will one day, probably for the 2017 World Cup, I think that maybe that's the 2027 World Cup. I think, me and Varun want to make a big feature on him because he is a bizarre dude. MF Jim says, after watching a Kim Apper episode, would the PCB take any legal action if they are punished beyond the norm? Would this accelerate a schism? And which side do you see the other test playing nations. I can see Australia, England, South Africa using it to wrestle some control back. The control question's really fascinating. I don't know, because I don't know exactly what the contract says. So there's a really interesting question, which me and Robbie never quite got around to. But let's say there is a clause in the contract that says, if you want to not play in a game, that's fine, but you lose that amount of money from your your fee, right? So almost like a strike, right? You're not working those 2 days, so you don't get that from your rights deal package that you get from the ICC. What would be interesting is if they try and say, well, actually, that game was worth, I don't know, was that $3 billion? That game was worth $150 million, $230 million. So you lose that much from your rights. I think at that stage, the PCB would be involved. But remember, it's really important that, like, people keep saying PCB and BCCI. This isn't the PCB and the BCCI, right? This is the governments of those two countries, right? So who knows what they will do? But yeah, I think if it was a contractual thing, but I don't know exactly what the ramifications are for missing a game at the moment. Ajit says, what have the RCB franchise done right in the last 2 years or so? Since 2024, the women's side has now made the finals twice, winning once. And of course, the men's side have won their final in 2025, and that amazing second half in 2024. Is there a relation between the two sides' progress, or is it just coincidental? They've just professionalized. And I don't know as much about the women's side, although I think I was asked at one stage if I wanted to be involved. I can't remember who that was. But I think there was something. But they've just professionalized, right? They had a really poor structure that a lot of people, like, as someone who's been involved with that franchise, and I think me and Robbie can talk about it, as well as most people, it was just a horrendously run franchise for a long time. Not just when Vijay Mallya was involved either. I think Diageo made so many errors with how to professionalize that. And I think they eventually got to the point where they were like, we just need to professionalize how we run cricket. And it seems to have been that has helped in women's and men's cricket. I don't know as much about the structure of the women's side, but I do know from, as I said, those brief conversations, that was one of the big things they wanted to do. How do we make this more repeatable? And I think with T20 cricket, this is the thing. You cannot guarantee success. That should never be the aim. It's too fragile of a sport. Even India in this next World Cup are probably one of the shortest teams ever to be in a World Cup. And we all know that due an injury or a couple of drop catches in the final, or in the semi-final even, means they lose, right? That's just how these things go. T20 cricket is so volatile. It's probably more like what? Basketball or baseball, and they don't have one-off finals, right? So I think all you're trying to do is make sure that you're making informed decisions consistently, and it feels like from the outside, that is what RCB has been doing. A person says, you mentioned in the last Wagon Wheel that for the Indian side, the World Cup doesn't financially make sense for them, largely because facing a lot of countries doesn't make sense financially. Oh, I think what I was saying is, this is the case for a lot of the major sides as well. The World Cup as so when India play a bilateral side against a major cricket team, I can't remember the exact numbers. I don't have them to hand, but it used to be worth around anywhere from $15 to $35 million a game, right? So every time India played, it was worth that amount of money. But of course, that was never prorated for the opposition, right? Or anything else. And so when they play Australia, it's probably worth $55 million, right? When they play England, it's probably worth $45 million. And when they play the West Indies these days, it's probably worth, $8 to $10 million, right? But they don't have a mathematical formula for that. So when India play the World Cup schedule that they have at the moment, so Pakistan, I can't remember who else is in their group. Sorry, I don't have the groups in front of me. But all the other sides in their group, those games are not worth anywhere near as much. No, take the Pakistan game out, but it's not worth as much as them playing Sri Lanka or anything else. So it's if you look at it from that perspective over a long period of time, you can make the argument, and this is what the BCCI did make the argument for a few years ago, which is why they ended up getting a bigger piece of the pie. We're actually not making all that much money from doing this. Now, the flip side of that is that there were many other teams who did the exact same thing for years, and like there are other areas where they did make more money than India, right, in cricket, and the same thing happened before, and ultimately you were not playing the World Cup because all the games add up to more money than you would from bilateral. You're playing the World Cup because India will play Pakistan, and India are likely to play at least one knockout game, whether that be in the Super Sixes, semi-final, the World Cup, or the final, sorry. And those games are worth a fortune. So each individual game is not always worth all that much. But as a package, it's still worth quite a lot, right? And then also, it's not worth as much to them from the perspective of... It's not worth as much to them from the perspective of TV rights all the time. But if you're a sponsor and you sponsor the Indian cricket team, you're not as worried about sponsoring them for the bilateral events. You are much more worried about sponsoring them for the major World Cup events and everything. So there are ways that it comes back, and it is still more than worth it for India to play in World Cups, right? But it would be much better for like Australia, England, and India could probably make a lot more money if they just played each other non-stop, right? But there are reasons why that doesn't work as well. Katakea says, why do some players end up being underrated despite having the numbers? For example, Chandrapal being talked about much lesser than Lara despite having stats not too far away from Lara. A lot of this is about era as well, Katakea. So when you're talking about stats, you're talking about raw stats. If you look at adjusted stats, they are quite different when it comes to batting in the era that they went in. Chandrapal struggles in the 90s when it was a bowling era and starts to make a lot of runs in the 2000s when it becomes a batting era, right? Just not having a go at him. He was younger when he started and everything else. But that's very different than Lara, who absolutely blitzed in the 90s when it was a bowling era. Then had a weird couple of years off where he enjoyed his fame and then came back to cash in at the end again when it became easier to bat in, right? You've then also got batting positions, right? So Chandrapal didn't go further up the order to help his side. He stayed down even when they didn't have any other batters in the side. So it's easier to bat at number 5 than it is to number 4, than it is at number 3 and number 4. But Chandrapal stayed at number 5, letting lesser players bat at number 3 and number 4 to cushion his impact, and that takes away from it a little bit. Then there's aesthetics, right? Brian Lara is one of the most beautiful batters you will ever see in your life. And Chandrapal looks like a crab that is slowly dying at times, right? You also have the fact that Chandrapal's big skill is not going out, whereas Lara's big skill was picking the gap for boundaries, right? Like, just, again, I'm not sure that's quite an aesthetic thing, but it's like, what are you going to remember of the two players? Like, Lara was really good at not going out as well, but it's the aggressive shots that you remember with him. And with Chandrapal, it's the fact that he would edge the ball and it would drop 3 meters short of third slip every time because he had such incredible soft hands. Then you also have the memorable innings, as we were talking about at the start of the podcast, like what innings get remembered and what don't. So yeah, there's all these different things that play. They're both great players, but they're very different. And I think that Chandrapal deserves more respect than he generally gets, but Lara is completely in a different class as a player to Chandrapal. I had Lara ranked, top 5 or top 6 in the top 50 batters of all time. And I had Chandrapal in the 30s. So they're both great players, but that's a huge spectrum. And you would never make the conversation that Chandrapal should be in the top 5 best test batters of all time, or top 10 best 10 batters of all time, right? Whereas you can make a claim that maybe Lara, I have him a bit high, which is fair, and that you could move him a little bit lower, but it would be hard to say that he would ever be the 30 best player, right? So if you're just looking at raw average, you're already looking at it wrong. There's so many better ways to be able to look at the talent of players. Reese says, how does squad composition differ between potential county champions and Sheffield Shield winners? And what are the non-obvious similarities? A squad composition. The biggest difference in Australian cricket has always been, it's a huge strength of Australian cricket, which is they will just occasionally pick people from club cricket, right? If someone's doing really good in club cricket and they don't have a contract with New South Wales or Tasmania or South Australia at the start of the year, right? But they've like made 500s. They're 24 years old. Everyone thought they were pretty good before, but they've obviously found a new level. They might just play in the next game, right? And in county cricket, what you have is you have an existing squad that you might add to during the year if a bunch of players get picked for England or a bunch of players get injured or anything else. But the guy who, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of if you're making a bunch of runs for Tunbridge Wells and you don't have a contract at all, and you're like 22 or 23 years old, you're very unlikely, almost, I don't want to say it's unheard of because it does happen occasionally in county cricket, but it's very unlikely it will come in. Whereas that kind of situation happens quite regularly in domestic cricket in Australia. It's a bit different now that they have extended squads, but if you're playing in Perth and you're suddenly lighting it on fire and, and they can just pick you at any stage. And then, so the contracts kind of work a little bit differently. But that's also because Australian club cricket is at a much higher standard in general than English club cricket. There are a lot more players who play in it. It's taken a lot more seriously. There's a lot more training and everything else. So every player in Australian club cricket is almost considered, and I'm talking about the top level, the grade and district, and well, it's got different names in every different city, which is annoying. But that grade district level, that you have the ability to suddenly be plucked out of there. So sometimes you might not have even trained all that much with Victoria or South Australia, right? But your performances have brought you in. Whereas county cricket picks from their squad of players that they already have beforehand. And it's very rare to bring someone in unless there is a spate of injuries, or midway through the season you'll do a trial and you might get a contract with the club or whatever. Whereas for Victoria or Tasmania, you can just come in at the last minute, right? And you might not even have a contract with those states up until the moment you are picked for the side. Very different to how county cricket goes. Especially when you look at second 11s and junior things and everything. It's much more based around who is playing good at the moment, whereas county cricket is much more based around who signed up at the start of the season. Hayden says, the ECB have a policy whereby no batter is allowed to wear a hat, irrespective of the level of cricket they're playing or what type of bowling they're facing. Why don't more boards, franchises, and leagues adopt this policy to minimize the risk of their players? Yeah, I'm not sure is the answer. I think, Hayden, if I'm not mistaken, this was a little bit insurance-led. I wrote about this for Cricket Info like a decade ago, saying that I think eventually every cricketer in the world will wear a helmet when they're batting or spin or pace or whatever, especially now that people play reverse sweeps and slog sweeps. I just can't see now. Sweeping seems to, well, the stats suggest sweeping is getting more and more popular. That's the shot that can really hurt yourself against the spinner, no matter what the pace of their bowling is. So I would assume that that's what we will see a lot more of. But I don't know why we haven't specifically seen boards come in for this. So I don't know if there's like a legal / insurance side of it, why the ECB did. But yeah, I'd be shocked if this isn't a pretty common thing going ahead. Just makes sense now. There's no real reason not to do it. Ali says, other countries have forfeited matches and lost points accordingly. Could there be a double standard against Pakistan given the financial implications of the particular boycott? This is a fascinating one because it's a bit like the 14-2 vote against Bangladesh, right? The 14-2 vote against Bangladesh was cricket boards, right? It wasn't political thing. It was cricket boards. And it's the cricket boards who are in the most danger of being screwed over by India not playing Pakistan. So it'll affect India the least, right? It could affect Pakistan in any particular way, but all the other boards, like TV companies who are already overpaying for the rights, are less likely to overpay for the rights in the future. So there could actually be a bigger impact, but I don't think I think that's the wrong way of doing it if you're a cricket board. The other thing is this still being dictated by cricket boards, or is it being dictated by, the Indian government and, Jay Shah's dad and the BJP and everything? Because if that's the case, then they're going to try and punish them even more, right? But as it currently stands, even the cricket boards are like, we can't allow India or Pakistan to not play each other. I mean, they're bent over backwards to make sure this game happens every single time. So will they come up with some sort of a double standard or a new regulation or whatever that may be? And it might not be that it affects this. It might be that in the future, if you do that, there is, because forfeits in the old days didn't matter as much, right? The rights deals weren't crazy high. And, it was actually hard to watch all the World Cup games in the old days, right? Because of cable TV didn't have multiple channels and there weren't streaming options and all this. Whereas now every single game actually matters quite a lot more. So yeah, there could be something. Leo says, given Australia struggles playing against spin in T20s versus Pakistan and Steve Smith's recent form in the BBL, should Steve Smith have been selected in the T20 World Cup squad? Why not? If Steve Smith had been playing like this for years, he would have been picked, right? I think that there is a frustration within the Australian camp that they have been asking him to play like this, and he hasn't. Now, I also believe that they think that their team is good enough. I don't think they're too worried, Leo, about how they've gone in the practice games. Now, that might be wrong of them to feel that way. I haven't talked to anyone. I'm just having had these conversations with Australians before about warm-up games. They don't usually take them very seriously. But yeah, you can make, I think, the same way that Pakistan brought in Babar Azam, you could make a similar case for Australia bringing in Steve Smith. The difference is that they have so many more other talented players that they could give opportunities to. And Steve Smith probably left his run a little bit too late. He's had plenty of years to make runs for Australia in T20 internationals, and he hasn't done it, right? That's why he's not here. There, wherever they are. James says, the mention of Usman Khawaja's aviation qualifications and experience in the wake of his retirement remind me of Sunil Wetanam. Oh, okay. Remember as a player for copying one from Jeff Thompson's Sandshoe Crushers in the 75 World Cup, but flying the victorious 1996 Sri Lankan World Cup home. Keith Miller, of course, was an RAF pilot. What other international players have notable aviation experience? So I don't think Sakana Raza ever actually became a pilot, did he? But he wanted to become a pilot. Colin Croft is a pilot. I'm missing someone else really obvious. Is there an English player who's a pilot? Andy Caddick flies helicopters. Is there a South African player who's a pilot too? Those are the ones off my head that I can remember. I'm sure there are more. But yeah, Colin Croft once told me like a 2-hour story about him flying a plane and there's being some sort of mechanical issue about how he's going to land this plane. And then he left before telling me the end. So I'm pretty sure he landed the plane because he was telling me the story. I'm not 100% sure. PJ says, how good could James Taylor have become? He only turned 36 in January. He wouldn't have been as good as Joe Root. I think he could have been better than Ian Bell. So somewhere between that group. I saw James Taylor when he was young play on a wicket that I don't know many people who would have been able to play on that wicket against a Surrey team that was basically a test attack. I think it was Tremlett, Yasser Arafat, maybe Turnbatch Mika. It might have even been Lindley. I don't know. It was a fantastic attack. And it was a dodgy wicket. And he made a 50 in that. And I'd seen him make runs before. I thought James Taylor was a fantastic player. I don't know, though. I had a little bit to do with James Taylor, like kind of at the start of his career. I interviewed him and chatted to him a bit. I always felt that he didn't quite... I felt like I believed in James Taylor more than James Taylor believed in James Taylor. And I think that's the difference between him being... Like, it's all well and good for me to say somewhere between Ian Bell and Joe Root. But would he have been able to realize that he was that kind of player? I think that's the important thing. And I've been lucky enough to hang out with a lot of players. I think I've talked about Chandrapal Hemraj before. Chandrapal Hemraj is a phenomenally talented player, but I was never sure if Chandrapal Hemraj believed that, right? I could go through a bunch of other players that I've been lucky enough to meet, and some of them don't. And sometimes it's the belief and the ego and the single-mindedness that you need, because going out and facing Mitchell Johnson or Jasprit Bumrah or Dennis Lilly or Jeff Thompson is really, really hard if you don't believe in yourself and you don't believe that you want to be there. I did a podcast, PJ, a while back with Mark Butcher. It was sort of a pilot of a show that Cricket Info kind of never committed to, so that was the only episode I ever did. But I still will probably bring that show back once. But listen to Mark Butcher. He was walking out to face Kirtley and Courtney, and the talent wasn't the issue with him. He just didn't believe he was good enough to be there. So I don't know how far James could have pushed that. But if you ask me, was he good enough to be in England great purely on batting talent, then I would say yes. It was a bit of a weird technique, and so we would have had to see a little bit more, but I thought he was an incredible player. KP disagrees. Reese says, what past aspects of cricket that have gone out of the game do you see coming back around again? Yeah, so I suppose the last one that we saw is the moon ball, right? That is a ball that has existed before, recently in T20 cricket. But if you go back traditionally in with the lob bowlers, they would bowl that delivery. So the moon ball is something that has come back. I've talked about leg cutters coming back. I'm trying to think of what else. The draw shot is a really interesting one, because what Steve Smith and Nat Sivabrant did was a variation of that. But there is probably, if batters keep backing away and bowlers keep following them, is there a way to get the ball to past short fine leg? Especially from around the rib cage, which is more what it looks like the draw shot was, it was mostly, it seemed left-handers were sort of hitting, when the ball was sort of cramping them, instead of hitting in front of their thigh pad, they were almost hitting behind their back thigh to get the ball into that area where there weren't always fielders. I'm not saying we'll get an exact version of that, but that would probably be something else that we will see. I'm trying to think of some other things that could come back. Yeah, I think those are that's the one that sort of, a variation of that shot is something that we haven't quite mastered perfectly yet. But yeah, I can't think of anything else, Reese, off the top of my head. Sometimes it's one of these things where, like, someone like me or Abhishek Mukherjee or, the other incredible historians in the game will see something in modern cricket and realize that it actually relates back to something that happened. So sometimes it's hard to tell. And people think so when Kyron Pollard was running short on purpose, right, to get one run, but to maintain strike, right? So he didn't have dot balls. I don't know if he knew that David Hooks had done that 25, 30 years beforehand, right? He probably didn't know about that, but he'd probably seen someone do it somewhere before, right? And so there's lots of little things like that that sort of come and go and fade away, that come from traditional cricket, but people don't know that that's where they come from. Hurt says, what do you think are the chances of women's international cricket fixing its calendar to provide more confidence and context alongside Premier T20 leagues before the men's game gets its act together? Well, it's run by the same people that run the men's game, Hurts, so 0.01%. I think right now, I would argue that the best thing that could happen to women's cricket is probably the women take it over again. And if that happens, there's a big chance of it. It doesn't seem likely to happen now that so many of these leagues are linked to the men's leagues one way or another, contractually. But the best thing that could happen to women's cricket now would be for women to run women's cricket, because they would be running it for themselves, and then you could do something like this. But I don't think it's very likely, no. Ben says, I appreciate this is a very wide-ranging question, but if India broke up into multiple nation states when the British Empire left, how would that impact the cricketing world? Would the nation states still play as one team like the West Indies, or would they each have their own international teams? Or would they even stop international cricket altogether? I think the interesting thing is, I mean, if you look at Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, I don't know if Delhi is quite in that same league, but let's put Delhi, and let's say they're all. I'm not saying that the cities, but the surrounding areas, the states, or the locations, or whatever it may be, as you've said, Ben. However it breaks up, some of those are more than strong enough to have played international cricket on their own. But are they then more like Sri Lanka, right, where it takes a little bit longer to get in, just because they don't have, I think I wrote about this recently, Ben. England used Test cricket to force India into joining the Commonwealth, right? Obviously, after everything that England had done, I don't think India were in any massive rush to join the Commonwealth. And England were like, well, you can't play Test cricket unless you're a Commonwealth nation, which is a ridiculous rule anyway. But obviously but that also means that, like, there was a reason for India to be involved in the Commonwealth, and they had a political importance to the UK or Britain or England, however you want to look at it, at that point, right? That's probably not quite the case when you break it up into all these smaller areas, right? And it's the same with the West Indies. I mean, Barbados could have been a test playing nation, right? There are times when Jamaica and Trinidad also could have been test playing nations, and Guyana's not that far away either. But they wouldn't be major nations. And so that would change the dynamics of everything quite a bit. So I think the Indian teams will come in later. What's fascinating is, let's say that happens, Ben, and you have like 26 different Indian nations, whatever we're calling them for the state of this. And a couple of them get good, and a couple of them, maybe one of them even wins a trophy, or or gets really successful, or whatever that may be. But is the pickup of cricket in all of India still at the same point that it affects everything financially? Or do you have this even more fractured but dynamic situation? I don't know. But yeah, I don't think they would have come together like the West Indies. The West Indies came together because of the university structure, didn't it? So we have, what, 3 made-up sides? Well, 4 if you count in women's cricket. We have 4 made-up sides in cricket. The West Indies was largely to do with the university structure, and then I think telecommunications as well. So there was a basis to bring them together. Ireland and Northern Ireland play other sports together. So the Irish cricket team being one country, despite it being not one country, also made sense. The East Africa one never really made sense and disappeared. And then the international team at the Women's World Cup obviously also never made any sense and disappeared. So I think there has to be a structural reason why these things happen for it to happen again. Abe says, people have often speak of a player being ahead of their time. Is there a player that you would describe as being too late for their time? Someone whose particular skills and strengths would have been far more valuable in an earlier era than the one they actually played in. Yeah, I mean, there's guys like Kevin Peterson and Shane Watson who probably 5 years earlier would have had far greater careers if DRS hadn't come in and mucked them up a little bit, right? Absolutely not their fault. Virat Kohli is another player who in Test cricket, I mean, there's a lot of guys with the wobble ball, but Virat Kohli is the one that probably springs to mind the most of someone who, if he plays 5-6 years earlier, it doesn't run into the wobble ball and it isn't as much of an issue, and it doesn't sort of, tank the end of his career. So there's a couple of like very modern versions. Vernon Philander, with his skill set, is he probably even more when pitches are a bit lower and slower? Is his skill set almost unplayable in the sort of 70s and 80s, probably the 80s specifically? Muhammad Asif in the uncovered era would have been, like, he did what he did on flat pitches. What would Muhammad Asif have done in an era of non-flat pitches, even the 80s and 90s, right? So maybe not even the uncovered era, but just that. He would have been basically impossible to play, I would have thought, almost any time he bowled a delivery. I'm trying to think of someone else. Like, what about guys like a guy like Pujara, probably before limited overs cricket completely and utterly takes over the conversation? is much more respected. I'm not sure he's a better bat in the other era, but he's much more respected and part of the conversation. You know, maybe I don't know if Craig Brathwaite's quite at that same level, obviously, but whether he's another one who's just played in the wrong generation for him. And then you've got like the Stuart Binney type guys. Stuart Binney a decade before is probably a mainstay in one-day cricket, right? For a team like India. And there would be other, I'm trying to think of other Stuart Binney type players. Aaron Hardy is another one that if they came along at another era, they probably just play a lot more cricket. Gaji says, Carlos versus Sinner, your favorite tennis player of recent times. I have no favorite tennis player of recent times. I know they both exist, but I don't know enough about them to say that. Also, your favorite from the GOATs, Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer. I think Rod Laver's my GOAT, Gaji. If we're being honest, I think Rod Laver is one of the most underappreciated or underrated professional athletes and amateur athletes of all time. So yeah, he would be quite high up there. I suppose of those players, Federer is probably the closest to a serve volley. I like serve volley. That was my style of tennis. So Edberg, Rafter, McEnroe, those are the sort of guys that I probably enjoyed watching more. I don't, Sampras was another one. Those were probably the players that I liked a little bit more. So someone like Nadal, I bored out of my mind watching Nadal. Djokovic, I can appreciate the theatre, and I grew up with a lot of Croatians and Serbians. So him and Goran Ivanisevic were people that I have lots of friends who are really interested in them. So I suppose I paid a bit more attention because of that. But Federer is probably stylistically the closest than anything else. Also, do you think tennis requires much more endurance fitness than other sports? Well, not women's tennis. I don't know, Gaji. I used to play 7, 8 sets of tennis a day back when I played it properly. I would play singles and a doubles in the morning. I would play 3 lots of doubles in the afternoon. And then at night, I would probably play maybe 1 singles and a couple more doubles. Singles is tough and it is quite endurance, but I'm not sure that those days were tougher on me than bowling 40 overs. And I'm only a leg spinner, so I can only imagine what, a fast bowler would do. And not 40 overs, probably 35 is probably about my limit normally. But, or making, there were some days when I would play cricket and I would bat all morning and then bowl all afternoon, in juniors and seniors. I found that more exhausting than tennis, physically. I don't know if it's just the standing or whatever. I'm not sure I want to play 8 basketball games in a day in the way that you might for tennis as well. I think squash is ridiculous, isn't it? I think squash feels like torture. Luckily I played enough of it to eventually realize I didn't want to play anymore. Satchmo says, would Viv Richards' career average and ranking in your book have been significantly higher if he batted at a rate that was closer to the strike rate of his era and curbed his aggression more? No, we gave him a huge boost for his strike rate. And also, his ability to change a game is one of the reasons we had him higher. Maybe his career average goes up, but in our book, career average is such a small part of it, right? When we're factoring in a player, as Satchmo, you'll see when we talked about the Lara Chandrapal thing before, batting average, what we were actually looking for is, can we find players with really low batting averages that are actually great? And we didn't quite find that, but we found players that, that we thought were slept on a little bit because of their batting averages that were worth a lot more to their teams. I think Darryl Cullen and Hanif Mohammed were 2 off the top of my head. There's a bunch of openers. Gower is one. We're just like, well, no, these guys actually were much better. They just, for whatever reason, didn't get the high batting averages. Like Mark Waugh is another one, right? So, yeah, the batting average is very, very little for me. But in Viv Richards' case, the fact that he was batting so aggressively and changing games you had to get him out within half an hour, right? You don't have to get Jacques Callis out within half an hour. You can get him out within 2 hours, and you're still a good chance of winning the game. Within 2 hours, Viv Richards might have made you cycle through about 4 or 5 different plans, right? And the ball is soft by the time he's batted for 2 hours. It's a very different kind of cricketer. They're also very closely rated in the book, weirdly, I think. MF Jim says, in the Pakistan-Australian series, Pakistan spin bowlers bowled slower than the Aussie spinners throughout. This caused a fair few wickets from balls that sharply spun outside the gap in ability between the bowlers. Is this a failure to adapt to conditions or inability to slow down after years of bowling fast-like delivery? It's really hard for spinners to change their pace. And I think it's something that we've really learned from probably watching test matches in India over the last couple of years. So it is not easy to suddenly, I think people are like, oh, you should bowl faster. It's like, great, I'll bowl faster, but now I won't be able to put the revs on the ball. Or I'll bowl faster, but it actually affects my rhythm coming in. And so I don't get the drop on the ball that I usually got or whatever, everything else. And it's the same with bowling slower. I find it, if you ask me to bowl a leg spinner 5Ks quicker than I normally do, I think I'd be able to do that pretty easily, right? That's a ball that is within my armory. If you ask me to bowl at 5K slower, I really struggle to land it where I want to land it, right? And I think we believe, because we don't really understand spin bowling and the mechanics of it, we're just like, bowl faster, bowl slower. But if you talk to spinners, they'll be like, no, that is not how it works. Crate says, it has been over a decade since death of a gentleman. It has, yeah. How would you reflect on the state of cricket today, whether it is in better or worse position, and how is it headed from now, and is the future bleak or hopeful? I think the future for cricket is very hopeful. I think now it is, even Americans find it hard to argue against it being the second biggest sport in the world. It is making money in a way that it has never made money before. We are getting players from Japan and Nepal and, Uganda and Papua New Guinea, right? In a way that our sport actively tried to stop that from happening before. We have, I don't know the exact number actually, but we have 4,000 professional cricketers in the world now. 30 years ago, I don't know how many, we had a few hundred realistically. Maybe maybe 30 years ago, we had 400 of them that were 12-month-a-year cricketers. We have women's cricket is incredible and is growing at just this rapid rate. If you're looking at what we were talking about in the movie, which is more that quite clearly franchise cricket was going to take over and it needed really strong, smart leadership from people who cared about the international game to keep it alive, then it's very bleak. Test cricket is doing great over the last couple of years, but what happens when it has a boring couple of years is really interesting. We have no one in charge of international cricket really, and less so now than ever before. We now have a fracture within international cricket that we've never really had before that's happening right at the moment. And I could, in 6 months' time, we might all even have half forgotten about this sort of stuff. But at the moment, it is there. And the most powerful people in cricket are no longer the people who run it or the people who play the game. It is the people who own IPL franchises and some of the other key franchises, but mostly the IPL franchise. So that just depends on whether you want cricket to be the same as when you're a kid. If you want cricket to be the same as when you are a kid, it is in a horrible state. If you want cricket to grow and find more places to be played, we're in a great state. But if you still think that international cricket is a big reason why cricket has been so great, then again, I think it's about as negative as it's ever been at the moment. Ajit says, Murali is easily the greatest Sri Lankan cricketer, but who would be second for them? Sangha, Mahela, Jayasuriya, Malinga, Ranatunga, or someone else that I'm missing? So I did this podcast with Fernando once, and I said, Murali is like the greatest cricketer ever, but do all Sri Lankans believe that? And he's like, no. It's really fascinating that I think from outside the country, we all know, right? Inside the country, it's not always as clear, which tells you, how confusing these things can be. The second greatest cricketer for them is Sangakkara for me. I think his one-day record holds up brilliantly. He was a batter who could also wicket keep. So yeah, I would have him there. And then it would probably be Sanath as an all-format player, unless you just went Malinga as a limited overs player. I know he played a little bit of tests, but I think you would probably have Sangha. This is just off the top of my head without doing any research. I think you probably have Sangha, Sanath, Mahela, Malinga as that. And I would have probably Aravinda Vas next, or Vas Aravinda next. Ranatuka is a really important cricketer to them, but I think he's in this class of actually, like, what you're really talking about here is his leadership, which I don't rate I'm not saying I don't rate him as a leader, but I'm saying I don't rate leadership as high as other people would in these kinds of conversations, but it certainly brings him back into that conversation. James says, in a recent Wagon Wheel, there was a great question about who is the modern Javed Meendad, and referencing Meendad's wily tactics of batting in a street-like cricket fashion. I am of an age and I remember seeing him play on TV, but never noticed any of this in his game. What specifically was it about his batting that was wily and streetwise? And is there any specific innings or highlights videos you can search? One of the best things ever, and I'm pretty sure Muhammad Issam did this interview, where he interviewed Richard Hadley. And Richard Hadley said it was impossible to bowl to Javed Meendad because every single delivery, he would stand in a different part of the crease. I think this also meant taking middle stump, off stump, and leg stump guard, but specifically what Hadley was talking about was length. Meendad would stand just in front of the stumps, and then he would stand 2 meters down. And so you couldn't hit the same length to him 2 balls in a row because that length was not the length that you automatically would have to another batter. So people are used to like a batter standing 2 meters out of their crease, right? There are some guys who do that. You know, I think Darryl Mitchell is probably, a pretty good example of that. But generally, those guys do it more consistently because they like being down the wicket. I think Butler might have done that for a little while, right? It's very rare for someone, or Keaton Jennings actually might have been another good version of that. It's very rare for someone to stand 2 meters out of their crease, 1 meter in their crease, on their crease, 1 meter down, back in their crease again, 1.5 meters down. You can't bowl to someone who does that, right? If you're a repetitive bowler, there's then all these other things that Javed Meendad did. Like he was probably one of the first players to realize that walking his runs was really important to save energy for himself. It wasn't exactly Mr. Fitness. The great stories are him in first class cricket, where it's just incredible. And I don't know if he ever did this in Test cricket, but I've never heard his Pakistani teammates talk about this. But Mike Selvey played with him, and I remember just sitting with Selv once and just getting Meendad stories. And they said that once he got on top, all the field would go out, right? And then Meendad in his mind would be like, how do I bring the field back in? I want the easy boundaries. I don't want a deep point out, a long off out, a long on out, and a deep mid wicket out, and a sweeper out, right? I want some of them back in. How do I get them back in? Or how do I get the guys from the ring back into catching positions at the very least? And he would apparently hit the ball into his pad and start to look nervous and play inside the line and miss balls and all these sorts of things on purpose, right? To make himself look scratchier. Then he was the first guy that really worked out that ODI cricket was about pockets, right? So he was brilliant playing the cover drive. So he started lofting the cover drive where he would just chip it over cover's head all day, forever. So he was just, and stories like this with Meendad just go on and on of the way he would think, the way he would anger people. Like if he thought a bowler wouldn't think as clearly, he would find a way to like infuriate the bowler. George Headley's another great example of that kind of a player. So, they do, appear every now and again, but it's Machiavellian. It's brilliant. It's in the book. Ben says, I've seen a number of people, admittedly online, Reddit, BBC, sports comment, saying Rashid and Butler are past it and should be canned. But I think they are two of the most important players. And in Adil's case, the only experienced international bowler. Is there some logic in their thinking? I'd have to look at Butler's numbers. Didn't Butler have a big year recently? Maybe it was too far back, but I'd have to have a look at his numbers to be sure. Adil Rashid is still England's best spinner. My concerns with Adil Rashid are probably that he's not quite the bowler he once was, and he still might be 15% better than Liam Dawson, right? At the very least, maybe Liam Dawson's caught up to him, and they're like 5% difference, and you'd still want the both of them out there. They don't have another bowler who can spin the ball both ways and land the ball on the spot consistently and outthink batters, because Rayan Ahmed ain't that guy. And who's second? right? But my issue with Adil Rashid is that in India, traditionally, he bowls a bit slow for Indian conditions, so that might cause a bit of problem. With Butler, you would still have him in that side. I don't. I. I. If I'm going into a World Cup, I probably prefer to have Butler than Bant. And the other thing with Butler is England still have a big problem with playing spin. I'd trust Butler playing spin over anyone else England could bring into that side at the moment. So, without going through their full records, although I did with Adil Rashid on Talksport recently, I went through his record. I still think there's enough that says he's the best spinner and should be automatically in the team. PJ says European T20 League, finally. Belgium T20, Malaysia T20, and a random game in the USA with retired stars, including Robbie, are going to play with business leaders. Why hasn't the bubble burst yet? I forgot about Robbie's game with business leaders. The bubble hasn't burst because there are still more than enough people who want to be involved with cricketers, who are willing to invest money and hang out with them. The bubble hasn't burst because of the betting industry. And the bubble hasn't burst because there are enough different parts of the world that still want to host these things. I mean, I'm with you. I don't really understand how a lot of them continue. The other thing is, I'm not saying any of these leagues are doing this because I don't know enough about any of these leagues really. But there is a money laundering aspect, right? There is a money laundering aspect, and we know that. And it's not just a cricket thing. We've seen this around the world. There's a lot of sport that is played now so that money can be laundered through this. There's definitely have been T20 leagues that I have suspected only exist for that reason. Then there's probably a match fixing aspect as well. Again, I'm not saying any of these leagues, I don't know enough about them at all, but there is a match fixing element to some of these leagues as well. So, yeah, it's not what anyone wanted to hear, is it, from me? But yeah, that's probably a big part of it. All right, I think we've got a couple of super chats before I head off. Aditya says, if one was to start a cricket data lab at uni, where should they start? What would be the source of data field scatters, especially visual data? It's a bit tricky to say, only because Combox just signed an NDA with the company about kind of this kind of thing. We've also got a partnership with IoT Delhi, again, on a similar kind of topic. So I've kind of already started this, so I don't know what to say. I'm trying to think of things that we are not looking at doing. I think the big lost situation at the moment is that there are millions and millions of cricketers around the world who probably want more. I just started running again. I had a couple of knee things fixed up, and apparently that's completely changed my life, and now I can run again. And my neighbors run, and I was talking to them about running and everything, and it's like it's really clear to me how much like things like Strava and your Apple Watch or whatever, that data is part of the kind of enjoyment of it, right? In a weird way. Knowing how far you've gone, knowing that you went up a hill, blah, blah, blah. There are millions of people who play cricket around the world, whether it be tape ball games, rubber ball games, cricket ball, actual cricket ball games, who don't get any information outside of the scorebook, right? We're starting to get a little bit of video analysis, like a little bit of video coming in, and we're starting to get a little bit of ball by ball stuff going into club cricket because of people who score via apps and all this sort of stuff. But I would have thought that there is a vast majority of that's where you get the information, and that also allows you to help scouting for everything else. So, there's a couple of companies putting chips into balls yet. I'm not sure anyone's perfected that. That's huge if you can manage to do that. And the other one I would say is is there a way to put something on the bat handle, right? A bit like what I think you can get in golf and tennis, where you get a bit of an understanding of how you go. That's probably where I would be aiming, that sort of stuff. Akshay says, Indians are so invested in cricket because this is our most successful sport as a nation. If that goes away, I think interest will fade in the IPL as well. It's a fascinating one, though. So, actually, 15 years ago, this was the conversation that everyone was having. I was told by everyone 15 years ago, and this is after the IPL had started, that eventually all the middle class kids would go to football. And then the next conversation was basketball after that. But it was originally football, and that the passion for cricket would slowly fade. Actually, I don't even think India has found all the people that like cricket yet. I don't even think they're counting all the numbers correctly. Maybe with mobile phones, they're better at understanding it. But I think what actually happened was there was a bunch of middle class kids who'd been educated maybe in the West who were like, cricket, that's my dad's game. I'm into football or, maybe basketball or NFL or whatever it may be. But all these other people that had been just as obsessed with cricket, but maybe were not counted for in the TV numbers because they were watching around shared TVs. Maybe weren't in Cricinfo's numbers because English wasn't their first language. Whatever, however you want to look at all those different metrics, have been exploded in. If India is no longer the most successful in cricket, right, argument, I also agree with. But here's the thing. How would India not be more successful in cricket than most other sports? They're not particularly good at the vast majority of Olympic sports. And the Olympic sports that they are good at are not always the sexiest, right? I don't know where their football ranking is, but it's probably not in the top 30. I know the NBA is very keen to get into the India market with basketball. And I know there's been at least one Indian player in the NBA, or certainly was given a contract. I don't know if he played. But as far as I'm aware, and having played street basketball in India, it's not like it's a hugely sport that is about to take over. Tennis has a chance, right? But you're still going up against the European countries who are very entrenched in tennis. So that's very much like football at that point, right? It's going to take a bit for India to not be good at cricket. And not only that, I don't think India has fully unlocked their potential for cricket yet. I think that if the BCCI was more, but BCCI isn't that professional yet when it comes to on the field stuff. Nothing compared to what the ECB used to be like before McCullum dismantled some of it, but nothing compared to the ECB, right? Nothing compared to most of the IPL teams. So I don't know. You're right, but it could be a way off. Lokesh says, who's the one player who could be in part 2 of the Epstein files? Just kidding. Please don't ban. Keep up the good work. I'm trying to think if there has been a cricketer who's been done for something Epstein related. I can think of murdering cricketers. I can think of fraudsters. I can't think of anyone who's been. There must. Oh, do you know who there was, Lokesh? Sorry to take your question seriously. But was it the Australian? There was an Australian umpire who I think was probably going. He's the one that I could think of. Steve Randall. Yeah, who was done on some sort of something related to child sex, and I think he did a lot of major games. I know he certainly did them in Australia. I don't know if he did World Cups and stuff, but he was like a pretty well-known umpire. I can't think of any players off the top of my head, but I can definitely remember him. I think he's from Tassie. Apologise to Tasmania. I didn't even need to give that information, but that my memory is he was an umpire from Tasmania. Fox1 says, who is the player with the most 170s? Check Yunus Khan, who has at least 6 or 7 innings of 170. I would think Sanger would trump everyone in that. I don't know. Off the top of my head, that's just not something I'd be able to come up with. Yunus Khan makes sense. I'm trying to think if there's someone else. Yeah, that's a very good question. Would Sachin be on that list as well? I'm assuming like guys like Sachin and Root would be quite high up as well. But Sanger would be another one I would have guessed. Don't think it's Callis, is it? And Eunice is probably another one I would have guessed. But yeah, off the top of my head, I can't answer that one. Triple Stroke says, Ashwin said if he was Cricket Australia, he'd make Travis captain. Yeah, it's interesting. Travis Head was made captain at a really young age. And I have always, and I'm not the only one in Australian cricket who thinks this, I actually think it held him back a little bit. He's really tactically astute and he's a natural leader of people. I'm not sure he gets the most out of himself as a batter when he's captain. And I always felt with South Australia that that was a mistake they made. They knew how good he was, but I always thought that was a mistake. And I think when he gave up South Australia's captaincy, and I could be wrong with this, someone sent me this the other day. Might have been Brettig or someone, that they think that losing the captaincy has allowed him just to think more about his batting. So I get why Ashwin is saying that, and it may still be successful, but I do think if I had any caveats, that's what they would be. Aditya says, super tough to see what you do with IoT Delhi. IIT Delhi. I don't know if IoT Delhi is just a typo. I think it is. I used to work for them. Lots of cool folks working their passion there. Yeah, so Deepak, who's one of the co-founders of the business, he's from IIT Delhi. And so we've got really good connections with them. So we've been working with some of the professors and everything there. Yeah, it's some fascinating things that we want to do. Obviously, I don't want to explain all of it, but yeah, I'm someone who wants to know more about cricket, and I think with this kind of a partnership, we can learn a lot more about cricket. Jessica just coming in again, like the champion she always is, with another super chat. And Zara says, curious to hear your thoughts on Kingsmead in Durban. As a Durbanite, always wondered why such an unremarkable stadium has hosted World Cup semi-finals. Yeah, Zara, it's not one of my favorite grounds. As a spectator, someone in the media, well, also when I was with Scotland, we played some warm-up games there. It's underwhelming. I don't know what the reason for the semi-finals thing is. That's a very good question. There is an element that sometimes what happens with you've got to understand that when you are hosting a big event, hotels becomes a very big deal. Do you remember years ago, India played Pakistan in Adelaide, and Adelaide is a decent sized city, but I don't think Adelaide hotel wise was quite ready for what was going to hit it. And if I'm pretty sure that's right. And I think there was another one. There's another time where India played Pakistan in another game where there was an issue as well. I think I'm right in saying that. So when you're hosting World Cup semi-finals, it might be about hotels. Now, I'm not an expert on Durban, but there's a lot of hotels, right, in Durban, from my memory of being around it. So maybe it's a place that has more hotels than, say, Centurion, where people would have to stay in Joburg and come up. So Cape Town, Joburg makes sense, but maybe some of the other grounds don't make as much sense from a hotel perspective. Like Burqa doesn't have a lot of hotels, does it? Right? And Pretoria, again, I've been there a few times. I don't remember it as a place with like loads and loads of hotels. So when you're organizing tournaments like this, I know this sounds weird, but all those things matter. And a lot of the England some of the other England grounds would probably have the ability to host the events from a ground perspective, but from a sellout crowd perspective can be quite tricky, right? So if you've just got local fans coming in England, they will just catch the train in for the day or drive in for the day and then nick off, right? But when you've got tourists coming in for, India games, Pakistan games, even big touring groups from Australia and everything else, it can get a little bit hairy in some of those cities. I think I've told this story before, but the World Cup semi-final in 2019, I was commentating for the ICC/SEN, and I can't remember where I was supposed to be the next day, but I was in Manchester, which is a pretty big city. And that night, I was going to drive somewhere else. I can't remember if it was home or wherever, but the game was supposed to finish. The ODI was supposed to finish, and I was supposed to nick off and go back. And of course, that game was rain delayed. The rain delay meant that that everyone stayed for an extra night, but also most of the Indian fans were there. I think it was India, New Zealand, wasn't it? Yeah. Most of the Indian fans already had their hotels, and the few Kiwi fans already had their hotels. And so me and Neil Manthorpe were suddenly contracted for the next day. But because we were freelancing, we were both not planning on being in Manchester. We couldn't, and this is Manchester, it's a really big city. we couldn't find anything under like 500 quid. Everything was booked out in the city, right? All the Indian fans had turned up. Manchester's a really big place, but even then, maybe there was some other event going on that same weekend or whatever it may be, and there was just nowhere to get a hotel. And so me and Manners ended up driving to this B&B like an hour north of Manchester, where we ended up sharing a room for like, I don't know, like 60 or 70 quid. But it saved us like 400 quid to be able to do that. And we had these little twin beds, and Manners is walking around in his underwear as he does. And it was really, really weird. But again, it shows you that when you're planning these big events, that's the kind of thing that you have to think of. Is there enough hotel rooms? Or is there something else on at that stage? So maybe Durban being more of a touristy like place than some of those other hubs that we talked about has more thing. But I think if you're just talking about the ground, I don't disagree with you, Zar. It's not one of my favorite places on earth, Durban in general, but the ground, not so much either. But yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. Please subscribe to Combox. Go to combox.tv and you can sign up for our waiting list. We have a Combox Descript channel, Discord channel as well that you can find out there. But please, like and subscribe this video and everything else. And we'll be back again very soon for more comboxing. And next week, there'll be more wagon wheeling. Combox. The game lives on.